Okay, so good evening once again, everyone. I want to thank you for joining this webinar, Navigating Your Child's SEA Preparations. I am Miss Ashley Borris, Principal of Ashley B's Learning Academy. I also have with me two of my very experienced teachers, Miss Alexander, as well as Miss Benskin, who has been teaching for over 10 years. Their students have performed excellently in SEA preparation, in SEA exams. And so we are so happy to be able to share this information with you tonight, which would be able to help you better able to prepare and allow your child to achieve success in their upcoming exams. If your child is in standard 3, standard 4, this is helpful information because you have the information beforehand and you know how to prepare. If you're in standard 5, it's never too late. It's we are here to help you because you still have a couple more months that you can make those changes and implement these strategies that we are about to share. Feel free to take notes. You can feel free to also ask questions, but not while the presentation is going on. Jot down your questions, and at the end, we will give you an opportunity to ask questions. All right, so without further ado, we'll get into it. So the purpose of today's webinar is to bring you into our world as teachers. As we've been in it for so many years, we have seen strategies that work for different types of kids, different learning styles, and so on. So we will be able to share. We will also share methods and techniques that has proven to aid in success in mathematics, English, and creative writing. We will also share some study tips for you to help your child. So everything here is what you can do. We've broken it down so that you parents can use the tips that we provide, right? And also how to achieve positive outcomes from the SEA exam. So we will be going through the SEA exam structure, what it entails, the weightings. We'll also be going through why selecting certain schools is so important. The school selections that you make is super, super important, and how it affects the outcome of the child. So definitely you want to stick around for that information, because if it's one thing I want you to hear from today is how to select the right schools, as well as understanding what the exam entails. So I'll go through the general preparation tips, and then I'll hand it over to Miss Alexander, who will take you through the SEA exam format, followed by Miss Benskin, who will go through the SEA specific subject tips, right? So my first tip is have a plan and make a routine. Routines are a great way to manage stress and promote productivity with your child. So create a weekly or daily schedule with your child, also factoring their pace and mindset. Set a weekly plan so your child knows what tasks, activities, and chores they have to accomplish. So in the morning, they do their morning devotion, they get ready for school. They start school, they go to school from 8 to 4, 8 to 3, or 8 to 2, depending on the school. After which they would have, some of them have lessons. Then they shower, they take they have their dinner, take a little break, and then they start their studies or their homework. This is just an example. Of course, your schedule will vary, but it's important to have a routine so they know exactly what they have to do. I've seen it where students, when they don't have a routine, they don't get to complete the important tasks that their teacher assigned, homework, revision, because it's not scheduled, right? So very important that it's scheduled. Limit your child's distraction. So for those kids who are in standard 5, time is of the essence. We have approximately 6 more months until the exam, and you want to use that time wisely. Distractions eats away at productivity and focus. So set up a quiet and comfortable study area to help your child focus at home. So in their room or maybe in the dining room, you have a little table that is designated to that child to be able to focus without distractions, without the TV being on, without people talking. They just have that time to focus and revise and be able to do their homework or practice tests, etc. Ensure to give your child space to study and get their work done without interruptions, and remove devices if necessary. I think it's important to have conversations with your child. Many times parents just tell them, listen, you have exam coming up, you need to do well. Don't go on the tablet, don't go on the laptop. But having them feel motivated to want to achieve comes with conversations. Why should you want to pass for a good school? Why should you put in the effort now and not wait until after to put in the effort? Just having those open dialogues. Because sometimes when I speak to kids, I say, why do you think it's important to pass for a good school? Well, I don't know. Mommy just say, well, that's what she wanted to go to because she went to that school. So I just, I just go with that. Or sometimes they say, well, I don't really, I just go with what my parents said. But they are not invested in actually wanting to pass for the school because they have no information. So Miss Alexander will share some tips in terms of taking them to the school, letting them see it, talking with other past students from the school, getting them really invested into why they should go to that school versus us telling them you need to pass for that because I say so, right? Get enough sleep and of course proper nutrition. The brain is a muscle that needs rest and have proper nutrition. So it's important that they get enough rest. Make sure they have a specific bedtime and they get at least 8 hours rest. Very important because their brain needs to be at its optimum, especially now. Stay hydrated, reduce the intake of sugary foods. If they love sugar, let's get a replacement with fruits, right? So whatever is their favorite fruit, you can probably substitute with that so that their brain functions at its optimum, right? Don't make them skip meals. Very important tip is to know your child's learning style. So here at Ashley Bees, we understand students learn in various different ways. We have those students that are audio, those students that are visual, read and write, and kinesthetic. The audio learners, they learn by remembering audio from maybe what their teacher may have said in school, maybe from a video, maybe from something they heard from someone. They are more in tune with remembering things they hear. Visual learners are more in tune with things that they may see. So they like a video presentation, maybe a diagram, a picture that represents something. Read and write, of course, well, it says what it says, read and write. So which is what our regular school system promotes, read and write. And then we have kinesthetic, those kids who need to get up and move, and it needs to be relatable to real life, right? Now, employing some of these strategies with them to learn their work would prove to be extremely helpful. So, for example, let's say you're learning timetables, or the auditory learner, you can actually have them record themselves saying the timetables, or like they say it out loud because that's how they retain it and remember it, right? The visual learner, they may need to see the chart, right? The read and write, well, they need to write it out about 5 or 6 times before they get it. And the kinesthetic one, they may need to be pacing up and down or reciting it over and over with a hand movement or a foot movement, because that is how they may retain it. So incorporating, knowing now, I am both audio and visual together. So I must be able to hear as well as see in order to remember. So every child is different. They most times they are a combination of one or two, but they will always prove to be higher in one of these learning styles. So you can observe, ask them, how do you remember things? Do you picture it in your mind? Do you remember what I told you? Do you remember what you wrote? So those kind of conversations will help you to know, oh, okay, well, my child is visual. I maybe need to get more charts. I need to get some flashcards. I need to get things that will help them remember things a little better. And number 5, motivate and support your child's wins and challenges. So now, more than ever, your child needs your support. Sometimes we ourselves get stressed and we forget to recognize the small wins. Maybe your child is weak in math and they may have shown some signs of improvement from now until they may show signs of improvement from now until December. But because you're so fixed on them scoring 90% in maths, we forget to recognize that they did show steady improvement. So you want to acknowledge that because that in itself is a motivational factor. Oh my gosh, mommy recognized that I put in the work. I went from 50% to 70%. And that in itself deserves recognition. Of course, you want to aim for 90. So you set those goals, which is my next point. You set goals to achieve the next milestone. So discover their passions, encourage your child by acknowledging their efforts, encourage and highlight strengths, praise small wins, and avoid comparison with others. I know that's very hard, right? But remember, your child is on their own journey. Their journey is different from another's, right? So you want to be able to acknowledge where they are at now and set those goals. They have their own journey, and you want to set those goals to be able for them to navigate their own journey. So as I mentioned, set goals, right? So set small attainable goals. You set the big goal, of course, which is to pass for your first choice. But then how are we getting there? All right. I observed that in your midterm exam, you got 50% in maths. So here's what. The next weekly test or the next examination, I want you to, let's aim for 70. How can, and you give them the support. How, you ask them, how can I help you to get to 70? They say, mommy, well, there are certain topics I don't understand. So you now can either look at extra lessons or you look at maybe getting a one-on-one tutor, or you look at maybe if you are capable, sitting with them on an evening and helping them. So you ask your child, because they are very smart, they know what support they need, just by asking that question. What do you need from me to help you achieve success in mathematics or in creative writing, right? So set small attainable goals. For example, getting all questions with fractions correct. Maybe fractions is a weak subject, a weak topic. So say, okay, let's aim to get all the fraction questions correct. That's our aim. That's our goal. Make and execute a plan to achieve this goal. And of course, when they achieve it, don't forget to reward them, right? So I have 2 more tips and then I'll pass you to Miss Alexander. Practice makes perfect. Check in regularly and guide them through difficult questions, right? Now, if you're not sure, that's where a guided instructor or teacher comes in to help, right? Build a strong teacher relationship, okay? So if you don't have a good relationship with your child's teacher, forge a relationship with their lessons teacher, because that's important for you to be able to ensure that you understand what their strengths are, their weaknesses are, and how they can help your child achieve that success. So ensure homework and class behavior is managed as well. So especially for my standard 5s, homework should not be missed. Practice test booklets should not be missed. I know it's a bit of a culture shock going from standard 1, standard 2, standard 3 to now being able to have this routine where you can't miss homework. You have to ensure that you go to school as often as you can and so on. But again, it warrants those kind of conversations. A different attitude is required for SE for them to achieve that success. So use worksheets, past papers, and okay? Start slow, meaning allow them to take their time. By now, most kids should be able to do section 1 without, they should be able to do section 1. So allow them to do it slow for now, but then start timing them, right? Miss Alexander will go through the time for each exam. So be sure to time them later on so that they can, because a lot of times students know the information, but guess what? The time they didn't finish the exam, right? So that timing is equally as important as knowing what they need to do. Review errors to understand mistakes. Don't just erase them, and answer all questions. Skip and return to the tough ones later. Okay, now errors is a whole topic on its own because there are different types of errors, but that's a whole different discussion that I may have to go through in another webinar. But there are calculation errors, there are logical errors, there are reasoning errors, there are so many different types. But if there's a calculation error, I will say that's an easy fix. That's just with practice, right? But if it's a logical error, like they really just don't know how to do the question, it's just looking foreign to them. Therefore, that's when we have a foundational issue and you need to go back. They need to get a tutor to go back over the information with them. Maybe there was something in standard 2 or 3 that they missed and they really couldn't remember, right? Because the S.E.A syllabus actually starts from standard 3. That's when the content starts building up until standard 5. All right, so very important that that foundation is strong. Okay. So review errors to understand mistakes, don't erase them, and answer all questions. And lastly, this is a tip for you, my lovely parents. I want you to manage your stress, so in turn, your child will not feel stressed. S.E.A exam is important, but it's not the end. I have seen students that were very successful in it and students that may not have passed for their first choice, but they are doing excellently now in life. So I want you to remember that it's not the end of the road. They will succeed wherever they go once you create the right mindset for them. But managing your stress is important. So be supportive and create a positive environment for them. Practice relaxation techniques. When, let's say, they have practice tests, 3 or 4 practice tests coming up, one from lessons, one from school, and you want to give them one on a weekend, and you realize that they are not getting certain things, so they are feeling frustrated, pause. Practice some relaxation techniques. Breathe, say, okay, take a break. You go, you exercise, you take care of yourself, you go, you just take care of you and then come back with a fresh mindset and you'll tackle it again. All right? So set realistic expectations. Encourage open communication about stress and feelings. If you will see the signs of them feeling stress when they say, "Mommy, this is so difficult, like I'm not understanding," right? And that's a sign that, okay, you need to get help for them. Or let them just talk, maybe just they just need a conversation, And of course, seek help if needed. All right, seek out therapy if needed. Seek out. We don't talk about these things often, but it's helpful and useful for them in this journey. So now I pass you over to Miss Alexander, who will go through the format for the S.E.A examination and why it's important to select. Of course, this is my final tip, which most of you have already been doing, educating yourself. And you are here on the webinar this evening, so that's actually an excellent sign that you are intrigued to find out about what this exam entails. So you're educating yourself, familiarizing yourself. I would say further, after this meeting, you can go up to the Ministry of Education's website and familiarize yourself even further to reinforce what we would have shared tonight. All right, and remember, your calm is their confidence. Your words become their inner voice on exam day. I will always remember my mom's words after I sat the exam. She said, "I am proud of you, regardless of wherever you go." And that stayed with me from then till now, because she always reassured me that she's proud of me, regardless of the outcome. All right, so our words have power. Miss Alexander, you can take it away. So Miss Alexander, she got bumped off, so she's coming back in. So we'll give her 1 minute. All right. Miss Alexander, are you there?
Hi, good evening.
Yes, you can go ahead. We're ready for you.
All right, good evening, everyone. Thank you, Miss Borris, for the introduction. As mentioned, my goal today is to provide parents with a clear understanding of the S.E.A exam, including the exam structure, the weighting of subjects, and tips for selecting schools. So I hope to answer any questions you may have and help you feel more confident as you guide your child through this important phase of their academic journey. So let's break down the exam structure. For S.E.A, the students are required to sit 3 main papers: English language arts writing, which we know as creative writing, mathematics, English language arts, which includes spelling, punctuation, capitalization, grammar, and reading comprehension. The table shows the time and order of the exams. So firstly, we have ELA writing for 50 minutes, which is immediately followed by mathematics, which is 75 minutes long. There is a 30-minute break, and after mathematics, and finally, we have the English language arts paper, which is 75 minutes. So the total time to administer of the administration of the assessment, such as the distribution of booklets, reading of instructions, collection of booklets, is approximately 4 hours and 30 minutes. But the actual time the students will use to work through their papers is a total of 3 hours and 20 minutes. Next slide, please. So let's get into the structure of each subject. The ELA writing paper or creative writing will contain 3 randomly assigned items each year. So either 3 narrative writing topics or 3 expository or report writing topics, right? And this paper is scored out of 20. Over the past 4 years in S.E.A, specifically for creative writing, section, there has been a pattern, an observable pattern, where narrative writing appears 1 year, followed by report writing the next. So for this year in S.E.A 2025, narrative writing was tested. So based on this trend, it's likely that report writing may appear in the S.E.A 2026 exam. However, it is not guaranteed. So it's important that children are prepared for both types of writing, both stories and reports. For the ELA paper, it consists of 36 items, they will be assessed on spelling, punctuation, capitalization, grammar, and reading comprehension. This can be fiction or nonfiction, followed by poetry, and then a graphic representation. The English language arts is scored out of 64 marks. Section 1 is 30 marks, and section 2 is 34 marks. Next slide, please. And finally, we have the mathematics paper, which consists of 40 items. It encompasses topics from the number strand, geometry, measurement, statistics, and the total paper is out of 75 marks. So in the mathematics section, the number strand is considered the heaviest and most significant strand. And this strand typically covers a wide range of critical concepts such as addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. So most of the marks will be contributed from these strands to the overall paper. So the number strand is a foundational strand. And so focusing on mastering these topics is essential for students to aim into a high performance in the S.E.A exam. Weighting of papers and placement in secondary schools. Weighted scores in the S.E.A exam are a way of giving certain subjects more importance in the final computed score, right? So each subject is weighted differently. As shown on the table, we see that mathematics generates a greater impact on the student's final score compared to the other subjects. For example, if a student scores high in maths, it will pull their overall score more significantly than a similar score in creative writing. Next slide, please. So now let's look into strategies for selecting schools. So the placement of students into secondary schools in Trinidad and Tobago after S.E.A is based on a structured process that takes into account various criteria to ensure that it's fair and balanced. So first, we start with the student's performance or their composite score, right? So the composite score from the S.E.A exam determines its overall rank, and students with a higher score are considered for placement in their preferred schools list, right? So the higher the composite score, the better chance the student will have for their choices, their preferred schools, right? If their first choice is full, they will be considered for the second choice, and so on. And later we will look at some examples on how the placement works. We also have parent choices. So I know now during this period, parents are selecting schools. So when registering, you have up to 4 choices ranked in order of preference, right? So the Ministry of Education tries to place students in one of these preferred schools. So parents are encouraged to make realistic choices when selecting schools that align with their child's academic performance to increase the likelihood of placement into one of their preferred choices. Third, we also have the 20% list, which is in regards to the nominational schools. They are allowed 20% of their intake for students selected by the school's principal. The remaining 80% of spots are filled based on this S.E.A performance. We also have gender. So placement is also affected by gender in schools that are single gender, example, all boys or all girls schools. A student can be placed in a school that accepts their gender, right? So co-educational schools will accept both boys and girls, and it's 50% boys and 50% girls. Residence is also important. Students are placed based on their geographic location. Finally, we also have multiple births. So siblings born as part of multiple births, like twins, triplets, etc., are usually placed in the same school. Next slide, please. How can you make the right choice for school selection? So when choosing schools for your child, it is essential to take a holistic approach. All right, so here's an explanation on how you can make the right choice. First, we want to consider your child's academic performance. This is imperative to make this analysis and analyze your child's strengths and weaknesses. Review their performance every weekly test or any practice test that they may complete. If your child excels in maths but struggles with language arts, maybe you would consider a school that supports a strong math program. Or we can also consider improvement over time. Consistent progress, even in weak areas, is a sign that your child is adaptable to learning. So look for schools that can support ongoing growth and focus, and rather than just focusing on their current scores. We also want to look at academic reputation of these schools. Look at their past performance. Investigate how the track record of these schools, particularly in their performance in CSEC exams. Schools with a history of students achieving high scores often indicate a rigorous, intense academic environment and strong teaching. Third, you can look at specialized programs. Some schools may offer programs that align with your child's interests and talents. So, for example, if your child is into arts or music or technology, you can consider a school that may offer support in these areas. Next, we want to also look at the school environment and culture. For example, discipline and values. Different schools may have different approaches to discipline and fostering values. Consider whether a school's disciplinary policies align with the values that you prioritize at home. So, for example, some schools may have strict rules and a strict structure, while others may be a little more flexible. Co-curricular activities are also imperative. It's beyond academics. This is the school that your child will be attending for the next 5 to 7 years. So it's important for students to develop other skills. So look at the variety of extracurricular activities offered, such as sports, music, drama, and different clubs. These activities can help your child develop social skills, leadership qualities, and resilience. So, for example, a wide range of activities might help your child explore new talents that they may not have shown before or develop existing ones. Parent, student, and school feedback. Talk to other parents who went through this process as well. They will be able to provide first-hand experience and provide advice. They could give you feedback on the quality of teaching from the school that their child is in presently, the support systems that are in place. Also look at students who attended these schools. They can offer their perspective as a student on the school culture and the quality of education. And finally, visit the school. This is what the school that your child is going to be most likely attending, all right? So if possible, attend open days or schedule a tour of the school to get a feel of the environment, the distance from home. This allows you to observe the interaction between the students and the teachers. And finally, we have the location and accessibility. So the commute, this is a big one. The distance between home and school is an important consideration. A long or difficult commute can be tiring. This is for the next 5 years or 7, tiring for young students, and it may affect their overall performance and well-being. So consider whether the school is located within a manageable distance and if the daily commutes will be reasonable for both you and your child. Also consider safety, evaluate the school's surroundings, consider factors such as traffic, accessibility of public transport, and the overall safety. Now, let's go into understanding the composite score. When discussing S.E.A composite scores and the school students are placed into, it is essential that we note that these scores vary every year, right? It's based on student performance, the availability of spaces in a school, and other factors. So the composite score is a result of a result calculated using an algorithm based on standardized and weighted scores of the 3 subjects. Although the Ministry of Education does not publicly release the exact algorithm for calculating composite scores, we have a list of some percentages and schools that students were placed in from previous years. So we can see that for the first school we have, Naprima Girls, this student would have achieved a composite score of 244.5. And percentages that may equal this composite score: for maths, we have 98.6, language has 84.3, and creative writing, out of 20, it is 18, right? And that produces a composite score of 244. For another school like Trinity, this student received 84 in math, 88 in language, 14 in creative writing. For Tunapuna Secondary, we have 227.31, This student scored 82.33 in maths, 78.12 in language, and 15 out of 20 in creative writing. And finally, another example that we have here is Bishops, and it's in the East. 233.64 was the composite score. The student scored 76 in math, 85% in ELA, and 19 in creative writing. So there you go. You get to see an example of the percentages and a composite score that student would have entered into that school with. So let's go into a short simulation of an example of student A and student B. So in this, a higher composite score means overall a better ranking. However, placement still depends on school choices and available spaces. So at first glance, we see that it may seem unfair that student B, who has a higher composite score of 224, was placed in 5 River Secondary, while student A, who made a lower score of 221, got St. Augustine Secondary. But let's look at how placement actually works. Why did that student get one of their choices and the other one did not? So each school has a cutoff range based on available spaces and demands. So high demanding schools are like SAGs, St. Joseph Convent. They have a cutoff score of around 240 and above. Mid-performing schools like St. Augustine may have cutoff scores between 215 to 225. So if you look at student B scores, this 224 was below the cutoff score for all 4 choices. We see that they chose very top demanding schools. St. Augustine Girls, most likely the cutoff score was around 245. St. Joseph Convent, the cutoff score was 240, so they got bumped to their third choice. Lakshmi Girls, the cutoff score was 230, they still didn't make it. And Ashja, the cutoff score was likely around 225. So since all schools were already filled with students who scored above 224, this student could not be placed in any of their choices. So now the ministry will have activated the fallout placement rule, which assigns students to the nearest available school with space based on their residence and gender. So that's how student B was placed at 5 River Secondary, which had available spaces and which was closest to their home. Now, why did student A get St. Augustine Secondary? So even though her composite scores were a little lower, her school choices were more realistic for her performance range. So her 4 choice schools, St. Augustine Secondary, likely had a cutoff score of 220, which matched her score because she scored 221, right? So while she didn't qualify for her first 3 choices, her 4th option was still accepted, securing her a place on the list. Right, so in summary, student A was realistic when selecting her choices, and student B because of the high demanding schools, it caused her to fall outside of her range. So this is why a lower performing student can sometimes get a seemingly better school because it depends on a combination of both their score and the school choices.
Yes,
So
I
just some
just wanted
takeaways
to
before
add
we
one
move
thing.
on. Ines?
Yes, I just wanted to add one more thing to what you said. I know some parents may be thinking, but how can I know what my child potential is right now? Because you have to select schools now, but your child has time to improve. So what we say is, yes, you're working to improve, but you also have to be realistic. If you know your child is scoring between 40 and 50%, I don't think it's realistic to expect them to be in their 90s by March of next year. So they may improve by at least 10 to 20. Sometimes we see even 30% improvement. But you also have to be realistic. Are you going to give them the support needed to get to that score? Are you going to be able to have the resources to allow them to be able to attain that score? So those kind of things you have to think about. But right now, you have to work with the score that your child is producing now at this moment to be able to help select the right schools, right? So I just wanted to make that clear.
Yes, so just some key takeaways to remember that composite scores vary every year. I know there are some available composite scores online. We need to use that as a guide. It's not the same every year, right? So 220 one year could equal to 30 another year, right? Placement depends both on marks, the child's marks, and their choices. Cutoff scores differ across all schools. So just remember those high demanding schools, those schools that are usually always placed at first choice, they have higher cutoff scores, right? We want to make sure that we make a realistic choice, as Miss Borris mentioned. Include maybe one aspirational school, two realistic options, and one safety school, which is a school in your area. Discuss your list carefully as a family. Don't let emotions or popularity of one school make the decision. We want to be able to make a holistic decision. And finally, we want to improve and focus on the improvement of the child and not comparing one child to another. Each child's learning journey is different. So thank you, and I now hand it over to Ms. Benskin, who will review subject-specific topics.
Good night, everyone. So tonight, I will be going through some specific tips for the 3 subject areas that the students will be tested on for the exam. That is mathematics, English language arts writing, and English language arts grammar and comprehension. Miss, you can go ahead. Okay, so this first step, Miss Borris would have gone through the different learning styles earlier in the presentation. So my first step is to put their learning styles to use. All right. So I'm just going to give some math specific examples for these different learning styles. So of course, with a visual learner, you would want to use like graphics and drawings to solve problems, even use like flashcards to put down like formulas that they have to remember and so on. You can also use videos to teach them concepts and things like that. For auditory learners, you want to talk through explanations. You want to use catchy songs or maybe come up with acronyms, get them to talk out the problems. For read or write learners, you want them to write down their solutions. All right, you can write down their math facts, they can write down their formulas, and they usually learn by reading these notes as they write them down. For the kinesthetic learners, you want to use movements in their revision, allow them to tap their feet, or even explain concepts through real life experiences. So maybe in the grocery store, right? Turn it into a maths problem where you see it fit. Miss, you can go ahead. Right, this one is an important one. So students tend to just learn steps to solve problems, right? And this becomes a problem because they are not activating their critical thinking skills, which is important for the exam, all right? So it's important that you question their reasoning, all right? I usually tell my students if it is they don't have a reason for carrying out a particular step in a problem, then maybe they're not supposed to be carrying out that step, because students just tend to learn the steps to solve a problem without actually learning or, well, understanding the concept, right? So ask why they choose to perform particular calculations while they're doing their revision, all right? And this ensures that they understand the concepts and they're not just regurgitating information. All right, you also want to compare the questions that they're doing at a particular point in time with other similar questions. That way you're engaging their critical thinking skills and you're testing their understanding of the concept, right? And how they are applying that knowledge to the questions, even when it changes up. Miss, you can go ahead. Thanks. Right, this is an important one, and one that I usually have a battle with my students about is showing their proper statements in their working. I usually get, Miss, why I have to write all of that? You know, they often opt to do the little calculations on the side and come up with their answers. But this is specifically important to section 2 and 3 of their exam paper. Why is that? Because section 2 and 3, these are the questions that are multiple step questions, all right, where it's multiple steps for them to arrive at their answers, and they are tested on these steps, meaning that there are marks allocated for the steps that they take. If it is that they don't show these steps, there's a possibility they're not going to get the total marks for that question. Also, being humans, we make errors. The students make errors as well. So in working through the problem, they might have all the correct plan to solve, but then when they get to the working column, they make a calculation error and their answer is wrong. Without showing the working, they automatically get 0. If they have their steps clearly laid out, then there's a possibility that they can garner marks for the steps shown once it's correct. All right, so I just have a little example here. So John has 200 oranges. He gave 50 of the oranges to Sue and sold the remainder at $5 for one. How much money did John earn? All right, so your solution or your steps or your working that you're showing is taking the important information and putting it into short form. All right, so total will be 200 oranges, amount given to Sue, 50 oranges. So therefore the remainder would be 200 minus 50. And of course, they will take this equation into their working column, work it out, bring back their answer into their statements, 150 oranges. Amount earned will be the 150 oranges by the cost per orange, and they would get their answer, 750. Also, encouraging them to work through this step method also helps with their processing and their progress through the question. Even if it is, especially if a question is very lengthy, sometimes they get halfway through the question and they lose their train of thought. So without having proper working, there's nothing to go back to refresh themselves in order to go on. So that's why it's important that their steps are very much clear, that they can always backtrack and say, okay, I did this. This is where I have to continue from. Right. Tackling worded problems. Now, this is usually the area you would hear not just students, but a lot of parents say, well, my child is having problems with worded problems. Why? Because it requires time, right? It requires time of analyzing the information and really taking their time to understand what is being asked of them, right? Because they have to now read a problem and decipher what they need to do, right? So the main tip here is that they need to take their time and read through the questions carefully, pulling out the key information. They need to solve the questions, come up with a plan prior to going into their solution, all right? Show their proper working, and of course, practice is going to help with that, all right? In identifying the key information, they can also use methods of underlining or circling this information to highlight it, all right? So it just doesn't look as like a big chunk of information. They can also visualize the problem, and that this kind of goes back to the visual learner. What I tend to do sometimes, if a student is not grasping the words within the problem, I tend to draw little diagrams or little representations of what is happening within the problem so that they can actually see it. All right. Of course, they want to break down that problem into smaller pieces, maybe taking it sentence by sentence, as opposed to just focusing on what the question sentence or what the question is asking you to solve ultimately. They want to use the plan, solve, check method, where they basically come up with a plan after reading the problem, work through their solution, and of course, check their answer or check their method in the end. Translating the words to numerals is sometimes helpful, because sometimes a problem gives you the words to kind of make it a little bit more complicated, you know, gives you the numbers as words, I should say, to make it a little bit more challenging for you to work through. Of course, practice. The S.E.A exam syllabus remains the same. So the questions are going to be based on the same thing. It's just a matter of them getting a hang of working through these types of questions. So of course, practice is always going to be a leading factor. Have them be the teacher. I always say, if you can teach something, then you understand it to some extent. So have them teach you what they did to solve the problem. Of course, relate to real life situations, create worded problems within different daily activities. They go into the supermarket, present a problem to them and have them solve it, right? And of course, foster the growth mindset. Some students are just very much deterred by the sound of worded problems, right? So you want to create that encouragement, encourage them to believe that their abilities and intelligence and talents can be developed through their dedication to it and of course hard work. Miss, you can go ahead. Develop a plan for working through the exam paper. So Miss Alexander would have gone through what to expect in terms of the structure of the paper. And well, for the maths exams, you know that it is divided into 3 sections. You have section 1, 2, and 3. This does not mean you have to work through the paper or the students have to work through the paper from beginning to end, right? Section 1 is what we call the quick, easy to get marks, but easy to lose as well section. It's 1 marker questions. It's really meant for mental mathematics. It does not require any kind of extensive working, right? So I usually say allocate 20 minutes to section 1 max. Of course, with practice, we try to break down that time. Therefore, they have more time to give to the other sections that are more challenging, as well as more time to check over. All right. So section 2 now is your 2 marker and 3 marker questions. Now the challenge comes with this section because it's very hefty in terms of the amount of questions. It's just 4 questions less than section 1, but it's 16 questions. And they're all questions that require working. All right, they are usually multi-step questions. I usually tell students, gauge the marks to gauge the amount of working you provide. So if a question is worth 2 marks or 3 marks, it means you have 2 steps of working to arrive, or 2 major steps of working to arrive at your answer, or 3 major steps of working to arrive at your answer, right? Section 3 now, it's the more challenging section. These are the 4 marker questions. So we have 4 major steps to get to the answer. All right, but it's only 4 questions, right? So sometimes a student might find it easier to tackle section 3 first, or maybe tackle section 2 first, and then come back to the easier section, which is section 1 that they can knock out. However, some of them may feel like, okay, I need to work through section 1, shake off the nerves, get my confidence in working through the paper, and then tackle the more difficult sections. All in all, this is something that they have to figure out as they prepare for the exam, and you can assist them with that while they work through the paper. So set little timers, maybe break it down into sections. All right, say, okay, 20 minutes and you work through this section. 36 minutes and you work through section 2, 16 minutes and you work through section 3, right? Use the marks for the questions as the time gauge, because it's 75 marks and it adds up to, the exam is 75 minutes. Of course, we want to work in less time so that they have time to check over. Miss, go ahead. All right, now I move on to the creative writing. Right, so creative writing, as you know, they can either be tested on narrative writing or report writing. The narrative writing, one of the most important tips is to encourage reading. Reading is very much important because it broadens their imagination and their vocabulary, right? This is where they learn new words, they learn their style of writing, they learn their expression, all right? So I encourage reading. Don't just have it as a task, but introduce it as a fun pastime or hobby. Give them things that they are interested in reading, right? Of course, we want it to align with, the educational value that they want to get out of it. But once they have that interest, they're going to gravitate towards reading. All right. Maybe have it as within their schedule, something they do before bedtime. All right. Make it routine. Okay. And not also just have them reading, but encourage them to tell you about what they read, or maybe write about what they read. Okay. Maybe have them as well jot down new words they come across when they're reading. Have a word bank of new vocabulary that they may have learned while reading that they can use in their writing. And of course, with new vocabulary, you want to ensure that they understand the meaning of these words and they can use it in context. Miss, you can go ahead. All right, next is report writing. So a report is basically a factual account of an event or an incident that may have happened in the past, right? So therefore, any real life event or experience the student may have had is an opportunity to practice report writing, right? So a way to encourage this is to ask them questions. Okay, simple things as asking them, how was your day? Tell me about your day. Right? And of course, you want them to outline these events in sequential order, right? What happened in the beginning, what happened during, what happened at the end. Okay. Of course, it will help to study like reports writing formats. The newspaper is a good resource. All right, because the newspaper articles are reports on things that would have happened. All right, so you can pull out the ones that are suited to their level, and you can, or even you can read these reports with them so they have an idea of how reports are done. All right, you also want to expose them to real life examples, and this one is important as well, because as much as report writing is factual writing, it's still sometimes it may be a case where the student may not have experience what they're being asked to write about in their prompt. Something as simple as write about a cricket match. Some students may not have ever been to a cricket match. So how are they going to write about how a cricket match goes? So expose them to different things, different competitions, and encourage them, especially make them aware, okay, you're going to experience this. Take a little notebook, jot down what you observe. All right. And this will help them in their report writing. Again, also studying examples of reports may help. And of course, practice. Right? So use creative games or challenges. This kind of links back to one of my earlier points when we were talking about the narrative writing and the vocabulary. You want them to broaden their vocabulary. You can get them to avoid using the what we call cliche words, right? Through challenges or games. So what I mean by that, often when you ask a student, how was your day? It was good. And that's as much as you get. Right? And when it comes to writing as well, sometimes they answer the prompt in the same way. Right? So a good challenge is giving them alternative words to these cliche words and tell them, okay, this week we're not using that word good. For this week, let's choose other words from the list of words that we have, and we are using it in place of that. And with time, it's going to become natural. They're going to be able to use it within their speech, within their writing, and so on. Miss, go ahead. Right, now for the English language arts tips. So this is focused on spelling, grammar, capitalization, and punctuation, as well as comprehension. All right, an important tip in grammar is correcting your child when they speak or write, right? The advantage we have is that we are English speakers, right? Um, but not all the time we speak with the correct grammar. All right. It happens. It comes in the local language, the slang and so on, but it's still something that we need to correct because they tend to use this in their writing or when they're tested. All right. And as I noted in the first point, children tend to write how they speak. This is especially useful for the grammar task in section 1 of the ELA test paper. All right. So you want to look at their writing, more specifically the use of the spelling and grammar, and ensure that it's correct. And of course, explain why it's incorrect, or maybe have them explain why it's incorrect, because sometimes they actually know. All right. It's just natural for them to speak in that way. Okay. Because they are learning the rules in class. Miss, you go ahead. Um, Lastly, I will just go through some tips on how to improve their comprehension, or how to help them improve their comprehension skills. Now, of course, reading comprehension is about reading and understanding what you read. All right. So we want to encourage active reading. So they're not just reading for reading's sake, but they're reading and they're thinking about what they're reading. Maybe slow down the process a bit. Okay, as they go through and they read, highlight, take notes, visualize what is happening within the passage or poem or whatever they are presented with. All right, of course, you want to ask questions before, during, after the reading session. All right, and that helps them to keep focus on what they're reading. You want to discuss the story, talk about the who, the when, the where, the what, and this helps them to make sense of the big picture being painted in the story. All right, and of course, this is an opportunity for them to expand their vocabulary as well, where they can learn new words in fun ways. So excuse me, so maybe create a little game where they can guess the meaning of words they don't know. Of course, context clues, but encourage them to try and find the meaning through the context or through the text that they're reading. All right, next point is show and practice. All right, have them. All right, so thing that can someone mute mic. Good, sorry. Something that you can do to help them while doing revision with them, read it to them aloud, right? So they can see how you are thinking and verbalize how you are thinking as you're reading, right? Give little explanations as you go through to kind of spark their thinking a bit, all right? And allow them to copy the methods and thought process as well. Um, Encourage them to read different types of stories, so not just the fairy tales, but have them read poems, have them look at comics, have them look at news articles. All right, so it's not just the same old monotonous thing. The reading stays fun and it stays fresh. All right. And of course, read often. As I said before, try to make it routine. A little bit each day helps. All right. The practice makes them better. All right. You also want them to read what they like, of course. Choose books on their hobbies. And of course, they will enjoy reading more this way.
All right. So thank you very much, Ms. Benskin. Um, this is our final slide, of course, before we open the floor for questions. Of course, if your child needs extra assistance, whether it be, foundational topics that you realize they need support in, or maybe there are areas that they just need some brushing up on as it relates to calculations and logical processing, then we have lessons here at Ashley B's. Over the years, we were able to achieve 100% pass rate at S.E.A, and our full-time students did really well this year and last year. So physically, we have lessons at our school located in Cunupia on Saturdays from 8:30 to 12:45, both mathematics and creative writing. And online we have mathematics, English, and creative writing as well. Mondays and Wednesdays, 6 to 8 p.m. and on Sundays, 12:30 to 2:30. The cost is on the screen. $260 for one subject, $500 for two subjects, and $600 for three subjects. One-on-one is available, but we have very limited spaces available for one-on-one. But if you are interested, you can reach out to any of these numbers, and we will be able to give you the information regarding one-on-one. Right now, one-on-one classes are recommended if your child has a foundational challenge, meaning they missed a lot of school in standard 2, standard 3, standard 1, or they are currently getting less than 50% in exams, in any of their exams. That would warrant that there is a foundational issue where maybe they need to go back to certain topics and get some additional help, right? So feel free to contact us if you do need that level of support. So that brings us to the end of tonight's presentation. I will stop the recording and allow you to ask any questions that you may have.